Hi, this is Lupe Prado. I am a career and life coach, and you're listening to Paid Vocation. In this podcast, I'll be sharing real stories of people who are doing work they love to help you find work that you love, whether that's a new role at your current company, switching careers completely, or starting a business. And if you're already doing work that you love, this podcast will be a place that you can come back to feel supported and uplifted. Thank you so much for listening. Simon, thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
So I like to start every interview by asking guests, as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I guess I was always in between. Well, I definitely wanted to become a farmer. You know, those books where you like those friends books. I remember I always put that in there. But certainly at some point, because I started working with wood at a very early age, I started putting like carpenter in there or furniture maker or something like that.
You
So it was always
did.
to do. Yes. Very, I mean, specific in a way, but also not. I guess a lot of kids and young people are, if they grow up in a small village like I did, they work with their hands and they do stuff outside. So yeah, I guess it was not that uncommon after all.
And do you mind
Yep.
sharing with our audience what you do today?
Well, I'm actually became a furniture maker. But it was sort of like a transition from actually carpentry. I went to school for, so I did that apprenticeship back in Germany as a carpenter. And then I went to school for structural engineering. But also during that period, I mean, I was you're like in your early 20s, late teens when you do that stuff. That's when I realized, hey, I want to work on my own and I want to work more creative and less labor intense as carpentry can be, like being outside and all these things. So that's when I sort of decided that furniture making is probably the way to go. And here we are, like 15 years later.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, I want to dive into your story a little bit, go back
Mhm.
to, okay, you were a kid, you thought about maybe carpentry, maybe furniture. What did you study in school? Was it a straight path? So when you went to school for structural engineering, I assume you
Mhm.
didn't think you were going to be making furniture.
I had a feeling because I made my first pieces when I was probably 16 or 17. So
Mm.
before, high school degree and all these things, but I knew I was sort of capable because it's like, I mean, those days are hopefully over or there's a transition happening right now. But it was a time that when you did like that apprenticeship and you only did an apprenticeship, especially in Germany, it was like, oh, you're not able to go to like college or university.
Mhm.
Definitely. Yeah. And the good thing is I never had pressure from my parents. They were always like, Simon, you're smart enough to go to school for engineering. You don't have to. If you want to become a carpenter or furniture maker, you decide. And so they were always very supportive. And I guess ultimately it was my mom who found that dual study program where you do that apprenticeship, but you also go to university and take your classes and courses. And ultimately you become both carpenter and structural engineer.
Mm.
So that was sort of like the thing where I was already in there 2 or 3 years in, and it's a program. I think it's 9 semesters in total, so 4.5 years. So after 2 years, I was like, yeah, no, that whole structural engineering thing and the idea of making a career in that field where it kind of like it takes you decades to get to where I wanted to be just doesn't work for me. And then the people, I mean, all the people I went to school with, they were nice, don't get me wrong, but it was just not my crowd in terms of structural engineering is not architecture. If it would have been architecture, like more creative perhaps, or interior design, stuff like that. But that was not the case. So
So more technical in nature.
yeah. I guess it still took me like, yeah, early 20s to really put everything together in terms of like, okay, what are my skills? What do I want to do? How do I want to spend my time? And that's when I realized, okay, the being creative part and working with clients directly and also getting credits for my work, like in terms of appreciation from the client and not so much getting paid or collecting paychecks. I think emotions and appreciation in terms of making people happy is more important to me than like a big paycheck. So I knew that at the end of the day, furniture making or stuff like that would be
Yeah.
my
Yeah. So, I mean, you were from Germany. So
right.
we were connected via my brother-in-law, my new brother-in-law who's
Mm-hmm.
German.
Shout out to
Eh,
Thomas, I guess.
Shout out to Thomas who's listening. So you grew up in Germany and then now you're in the States.
Right.
Tell us about that journey. Was it work that brought you here? Was it family? And then also tell us about building your business.
Right. So, yeah, there's that. I always forget that part that I at some point moved here. And if you don't know me, it could be like, oh, yeah, perhaps there is family in the US or whatever. No, I just always liked, especially New York City and the East Coast. Like, I traveled, I don't know, for years. I came over here and I have very close friends in Connecticut. So I could always stay with them. And I came here when I was 29, so 5 years ago. And it was indeed not necessarily a job in terms of like someone wanted to hire me, but it was me who said, I'm hitting a point in Germany where without hiring 10 people and making this a big operation, I'm probably not going to get that much further. So that was the one thing, but just overall, I mean, doing this for like almost 10 years, what I was doing. And I had my small business in Germany and it was successful and I had fun and, everything was great. But again, there was this love for the East Coast, New York City, and the idea of, yeah, just give it a shot.
Mm-hmm.
And then the only tricky part is, especially because I did not have a job offer or anything, but I wanted to start my own thing over here. You got to figure out, the visa and all these things. So that took me about a year and some investments. And that's how I ultimately ended up over here.
I'm sure that was its own hurdle, right? Trying to figure that all out.
Yeah.
Once you did get that figured out, how did you go about figuring out where to start? You're from Germany, you're not from here, you're like
Well,
new.
yeah.
Was it hard? I mean, figuring out where to sell, what to make. I don't know. Like, tell us about that process.
So, a couple thoughts or a couple things on that. Well, first of all, I was forced to write a business plan for my visa.
Oh, interesting.
Where I was like, I don't know. I mean, I built my business in Germany over years. I started in a small village and then I had tons of contacts and friends and people who knew me and they knew I did good work. So it was word of mouth. Like, of course, I had a website, Instagram, Facebook, but it was word of mouth at the end of the day. For me, it was pretty clear it's going to be the same way over here, which also means that you're not going to, start in year one and then in year two, you make the revenue you want to make, right? It takes time. You got to build it up. But then there was this problem with the business plan because, I mean, long story short, this would have been a one-page business plan where it's like word of mouth. I knew people right here and they gave me some jobs to start with. And then, you do a cocktail party and you just network. And I knew it's going to work out. It would take a little longer than perhaps what they wanted to see in that business plan or what the consulate wanted to see. So, yeah, of course, I came up with certain milestones in the business and hiring people and buying more equipment over the years. And I did. I mean, that's the thing. That's the funny thing. Like, it's definitely more business and perhaps money focused over here than it was in Germany because I have more money to pay back and stuff like that than I had in Germany. So, of course, I got to be a little more responsible about that. But yeah, again, long story short, it was word of mouth. And I mean, I tried a few things on Instagram and Facebook and just generally like even LinkedIn. I posted some of my furniture and perhaps in one way or the other, maybe I don't know about it. It led me to some business, but the majority, I'd say 80-90% is just working with the right people, which over here makes things a little easier, or the fact that you work with architects and contractors more than you do in Germany, and at least I did, makes it even easier to connect and get more business. So.
Well, the way you're describing it, Simon, it makes it sound like almost easy. And I know that it's not.
No.
Because I've coached entrepreneurs and like being an entrepreneur myself, I remember thinking, I'm going to quit my job and clients are just going to come filing in and it's going to be word of mouth and it's going to be great. And it didn't necessarily, it took a while. It took me years to really like get to the point where I am now. So tell us about that process. And you said, I know it's going to work. I didn't know if it was going to work. I'm like, I think I'm a good coach, I think, but there's like such confidence in what you were saying. So tell us more about all that process.
I mean, again, it all sounds, because now I'm still not where I want to be with the business, but I'm definitely very close. So it's easy for me to say. And I got to say, I moved here right before COVID hit. And I'm saying it hit, it was already around, but they closed the borders 2 days after I got in.
Oh my God.
Here I was with my visa, ready to rumble and work my ass off, but then nothing, right? And luckily with the support of my friends in Connecticut, and I knew that I had a huge job coming up at their house. which I lived at their house and I worked for them for the first 6 months and renovated the living room. Renovating in terms of like there was wooden paneling, it was all wood related. And I also project managed a little bit. So that was a huge, huge help. And I sort of knew they would have my back if shit hits the fan. But overall, again, the good thing for me was like I did it before, right? Yeah, maybe I was 10 years younger, but now I was more experienced. So when I left Germany, I think I was in a great spot in terms of like experience, not only with what I'm doing here in the shop or back in Germany in my shop, but also like the whole thing. Like, I mean, there are taxes, there are clients to manage. There's so much more than just being a woodworker, right? So I had no doubts that if I end up meeting the right people, like those contractors or even a client, I have returning clients, they come back, whatever, after a year and they're like, yeah, now we're ready for the next piece or whatever,
Yeah.
So that definitely made it easier because I know my qualities and certainly the quality of my product at the end of the day. And on top of that, Americans, sometimes they make it sound easier than it might be at the end of the day because they always give you like, even, and I met so many people. I mean, when I set up shop here in Catskill, I had people coming in and they looked at what I did with the renovation and stuff. And they were like, oh my God, you are amazing. You're doing such a great job here. And you were like, of course you are German. So you know what you're doing. That can be misleading too, right? I mean, I would never recommend anybody to whatever, finish an apprenticeship in Germany and move over here and start your business. That's probably not the way to go. But I was able to put things in perspective. And first of all, I have to look at my work and be like realistic about it. And, sometimes when I do work for myself where I can't spend the time or the money on, I'm like, is this good enough? Would I sell this to a client? Sometimes I wouldn't because it's for myself. But then again, I don't have the budget either. It's very important to just, focus on what what your qualities are. And don't get distracted by people telling you that you're great and you're going to figure this out and you're going to whatever, rock and roll. There's some truth to it. The market itself is a little easier than it is in Germany, I got to say. So if you really know what you're doing and you're good at what you're doing in my field, I think you have a pretty easy-ish time to get started. Still, I always forget about the fact that I love what I do and work doesn't feel like work, at least in 95% of the time. There is always times where I'm like, oh, I want to get this done and I want to move on to the next project. And this has been going on for too long, blah, 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 blah. But again, I get up in the morning, I'm like, yeah, let's fucking do this. It's not like, oh, you know how it is. I mean, you're self-employed and we all have our days where it's not great, but the majority of days are fun. So.
Yeah, no, I love that you share that because part of the reason I started this podcast was because I used to be in accounting and financial reporting and I didn't love what I did. I didn't feel connected to it. And I pivoted to coaching and I love what I do. I still can't believe I get paid to talk to people.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I love what I do. I'm like, oh, and so to hear someone else say that in a completely unrelated field and say, I love what I do, that's inspiring to me.
It's possible for sure. And I always wish for people around me to experience that too. And I also understand that I know a lot of people, they love what they do as well. And they have a huge passion for their job, but then they may not be self-employed. So they don't work towards their own goals and stuff like that. So they do go to work and they're happy and they come back at night and had a great day and everything. But it's still not the commitment. They cannot commit as much as somebody can who runs their own thing. So I guess there's still that fine line. But yeah, what I realized, and I realize it more and more, is the hard work part where I'm always like, yeah, I mean, I do it because if I don't do it, I don't get shit done. And the good thing is about my work, it's very physical, right? It's very like, I mean, physical labor, but physical in terms of like you can touch it.
Oh, yeah, like a tangible,
tangible, right? That was the word I was looking for. So it's like, at the end of the day, I can go to what I worked on and touch it and be like, oh yeah, like this morning it was still like rough and unplaned and now I planed it down and cut it to size. So yeah, of course I can see progress. And I guess that's also a good motivation for just get shit done.
Was there ever like a pinch me moment where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I just got hired for that job, or I can't believe I produced that piece of furniture? Was there ever like moments like that? Or has it been like,
well, I don't know if you experienced that too, but I almost feel like because everything happens so almost naturally, and it's kind of like I always describe it like in a very healthy way. It's not that I moved here and like 6 months later I get bombed with a like $1 million job down in the city. That didn't happen. It still didn't happen to that day. So it just, because it all feels so natural, but if let's say what I'm doing now would have happened 5 years ago, I would have been like, holy shit. I don't know, 10 years ago, like in my mid-20s, when I was just a visitor and I came to the city, when party, whatever, walked around the city, I'm like, oh, it'd be nice to do a job, in Tribeca, whatever. And all of a sudden I do, still not like every month, but I've done jobs in Tribeca and whatever, most areas in the city. So these kind of like milestones or goals, almost like they don't disappear, but they're not as, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. It's like the natural
which is not a
evolution.
bad.
Yeah, of your growth.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think it's a great thing because it's you like grounded, right? Where it's like, okay, I worked towards it. And there were several steps I had to take before I got to where I wanted to be. And now where you wanted to be like 5 or 10 years ago, you're like, okay, but what's next? What else can we do out there? So it's a great motivator too.
Yeah. No, I love that you're highlighting that because I think that's how it really works. I mean, I'm sure there's some entrepreneurs that experience incredible growth or had something go viral, but it is this like natural progression and this growth that keeps happening, that keeps pushing you. I always talk about that being an entrepreneur is almost like one of the greatest self-development, personal growth opportunities that there is, because there's so much pushing. Not that there isn't that, and when you're not self-employed, there totally is. And there's this thing about when you have your own business and you keep pushing yourself to the next thing, how there's always some growth that needs to happen, just like with promotions in corporate, and there's more growth to be done. What would you say to someone listening who's thinking, I have a passion, or maybe they want to work with their hands, right? Maybe they have a corporate job and, they'd like an opportunity to decompress and like do something with their hands. What you just talked about, have like a tangible thing, or they have a passion and maybe they want to start exploring that and see what might come of it. What might you say to those people listening?
I would definitely encourage everyone to do it if you feel like you want to get into almost anything. But I also understand, and it's funny because I started training someone about 8 months ago. It's interesting because he didn't know anything about woodworking or in general working with his hands. He grew up in the city. So he moved up here, upstate New York, in June. So he literally spent 30 years in the city and came up here and not knowing anything about woodworking I mentioned it before, or at least to you, building a new wood shop. So there's a lot of like, there's dirt to shovel or stuff to rake. And he never, you can tell he feels uncomfortable doing that. And that's also like, it was an eye opener because I'm like, well, I thought everybody knew how to do this. Right. Where it's like, no, Simon, you were 5 years old when you held your first shovel. Of course, you know how to do this. Right. And same thing with a jigsaw, perhaps, or even a handsaw. I was like very young. And of course, it feels very natural. But I understand that for some people, it can be intimidating, not to mention dangerous if you like jump right in and get a power tool. So I would always say, if you want to do something, whatever, carve a spoon. Right. And that's also the advice I'm giving him. And right now he has like smaller projects where I'm like, you have access to your mom's wood shop. You can spend time over the weekend and just build something, not with like heavy machines like I have here in the shop, but with like smaller machines or tools you can handle.
So start small.
Start small. Like, don't get overwhelmed or anything. Like, you don't want to build like a high-end piece right away with whatever expensive veneer or expensive wood. Just build something. It'll kind of happen naturally. And the thing is, it doesn't matter how old you are. It will always take you time, right? In my case, it didn't show because I was just young and I learned the world, and woodworking happened to be part of that world. And if you're like, let's say, the person I'm training right now, he's 4 years younger than I am. So he's 30 years old. And for him, it's like a completely new thing and chapter in his life. And it will take him longer to get to a point where I was when I was, let's say, 16, because as an adult, it takes more time. But back to your question, I guess it comes down to like what the ultimate goal is. Is it like, I want to be a, hobby furniture maker, or I just want to build stuff out of wood for my house. then you can totally go ahead, buy some hand tools and have fun. It's definitely easy to learn. And I always tell people I learned a lot of stuff, even when I want to pick up new stuff. And it doesn't matter if it's in the shop or working on cars or stuff. I Google, there's YouTube. I mean, there's so many tutorials. That's where I would start with, get familiar with how the process works. And then also like think about what you want to make. You want to carve a spoon. Everybody knows what a spoon looks like, right? So that's easy. But then let's say you want to build like a little stool for your plant, whatever. I mean, there's different designs you can do. And then you find a tutorial for it. And there's usually like a list of things you will need, like tools and wood. And maybe you find somebody, like one of your friends happens to be a furniture maker, and you can ask them for wood and tools and advice. But nobody should be intimidated or anything.
Yeah, so I'm hearing you start small. Exactly. You can figure it out. There's so many resources online. And I think that applies to any goal, not just woodworking.
No, definitely. Yeah. And in general, I know it about New York City because before I knew that I'm going to set up shop up here in Catskill, I looked at different places where you can actually rent like a spot. And it depends, like, there are people that supervise. So if you have no training at all, I'm sure they will help you out and you take a class or whatever. But I would strongly advise to just start at home in your garage, in your basement. Just do small stuff before you take a class because they can be expensive and then you don't want to waste money. So I think the whole woodworking world is pretty accessible in terms of
Yeah, well, you're the first guest that does furniture on the podcast. I think it's so cool and so interesting, and that you figured out how to have a successful business doing it, which is really awesome. Where can people learn more about you? Where can people follow your work? Tell us all the things.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously try to do my Instagram, my website, Facebook, not so much anymore, but yeah, I guess I actually have more work of mine on Instagram than I have on my website. I guess the website is more from stuff I've been doing in Germany. So
and what's your Instagram?
That's Simon Perschbacher. Just one.
Okay, so we'll link it in the show notes. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
But yeah, I'm also working on a YouTube channel.
Fun.
Yes. We started filming earlier this year, and I was planning on having a couple episodes ready before we launch. But now, the wood shop and everything takes time. So yeah, I still want to do it. It's not going to be tutorials or anything. It's just basically my lifestyle, basically what I do every day, which is not only woodworking. So yeah, that's another thing, which is
going that's awesome. Congrats.
Thank you. Yeah, that's perhaps something similar to when you work like a corporate job or whatever, you want to get into woodworking. That's YouTube to me.
Yeah.
My comfort zone. I'm in front of the camera and also like incorporating that into like my daily life and being here. So it's very similar and interesting to have that experience.
Yeah. Well, I'll repeat your advice you gave to the listeners to start small.
Definitely. Go.
That's awesome.
But think big. Start small, but think big. Still in the US after all, right? I mean, because otherwise it just doesn't work out, I think.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to this show. I hope that you found the episode helpful. And if you like the show, please subscribe and don't forget to rate and review. I'd also love to connect on Instagram. Send me a DM. I'm at Lupe Prado Coaching. I'll talk to you soon.